Thank you for tuning in to watch or to listen to this message today. Wherever you are, at home, in your car, on your computer, on your phone, we're just excited that you're spending time with us. We are on a mission here at CRB to lead people to know and love Jesus. And so if you call this place your home, I encourage you to visit our Give page on our website, where you can find a few easy ways to faithfully support God's work here at the church, financially, through online giving. At CRB, we believe that love will save the world, and the best place to do that is in the local church. So if you live in San Diego or if you're visiting the area, we just want to invite you to come join us on a weekend, come hang out with us, and be a part of the family here. Enjoy the message.
There's something about Father's Day where the images that you see in advertisements or commercials, whether it's a print ad or a catalog that comes in the mail for Father's Day, there's something about the pictures, the images of Father's Day that are so picture perfect. They're so airbrushed when you see them. A catalog came in the mail a couple days ago to our house, and it was a Father's Day advertising a Father's Day sale. And the image on the cover, I mean, it was just so picture perfect. It was of a dad who, he looked like Brad Pitt, reclining on his boat, holding his toddler, which right there is like, come on, man. What dad of a toddler owns a boat, for crying out loud? It's impossible. You can't relate to that. Show me a picture of like an exhausted father with bags under his eyes and a dad bod running around on a playground. I mean, that's just realistic, and I can relate to that. It's just when you see the images at Father's Day, this is true at Mother's Day as well, or any family holiday, the picture that we carry around, I think it's deep in the American consciousness, is so picture perfect. It's so pearly white that there's a picture perfect father. There's a picture-perfect mother. This is true whether you're a Christian or not. There's just sort of this image that we hold up of what family or what a father or mother is supposed to be. You see this when you go to Target or you go to Walmart. I don't know if anybody's in the market for a picture frame, or if you've been in the market for a picture frame lately, you know this is true. There's just that sort of pearly white, picture-perfect scene of what a family is. When you go buy the picture frame, there's already that stock photo that you see. Anybody like me, you just buy it and you just hang it on the wall as is? This looks good right there. Just make it look like we live in a hotel 24/7. It's just, it's nice. There's just that stock photo that's already in the picture. And, if I tried this, it would never work out. If I tried this right here, we would end up in the ER this afternoon. It was just never how it actually works out. And you know as well as I do, in these stock family photos, these people probably didn't even know each other an hour before the photo was taken. It's not realistic, but there's that picture-perfect scene of what we think family is supposed to be, and it's driven deep, whether you're a Christian or not, into our thinking, our way of life. And I know for me, especially at Father's Day, there's that striving, there's that thinking of how can I become sort of that Pinterest-perfect father? How can I become, that kind of image? That's what we hold up. And I think for a lot of us in the room today, there's a striving, there's a struggle, there's an exhaustion that comes in with trying to be that kind of father, that kind of mother, that kind of family, that sort of picture-perfect, airbrushed family. For a lot of us on Father's Day or Mother's Day, these holidays sort of accentuate, or they remind you that oftentimes there's a pain in our family. There's a struggle, there's a guilt perhaps on a Father's Day because somewhere along the way, this got lost for you and your family. Somewhere along the way, there was something that was, things just didn't go the way they were supposed to. In fact, I would be willing to bet if we sat around a table at lunch and, you started telling stories of your family and I started telling stories of my family, you would tell a story of how, somewhere along the way, there wasn't supposed to be a divorce. There wasn't supposed to be a foreclosure. Nobody was supposed to lose their job. And somewhere along the way, the picture-perfect image was just shattered. He wasn't supposed to get sick. It wasn't supposed to happen the way that it happened. And somewhere along the way, I think for a lot of us, there's either a striving and a struggle to become this, or there's a guilt, or there's this sort of, pain that sets in because this isn't realistic and it's just not possible for us. For some of us, there's that guilt because you can't hand this to your kids. You can't hand this to the next generation. It's just not possible. It's just not realistic because of choices that were made or because of circumstances in your particular family. And so my goal for today, some of you are like, well, that sounds really like a depressing Father's Day. My goal for today, because I just believe this is true. In fact, I think if we all went to lunch together today, and if we just all sat around a table telling stories of our family, we would all realize that nobody in the room today comes from a picture-perfect family. In fact, if you just videoed my family during the week, nobody would come back to church ever. But if just nobody has a picture-perfect family, and nobody comes from a picture-perfect family. Here's sort of my goal for today. I just want to free everybody from the illusion that this is what we should be striving for and struggling to become. I just want everybody to walk out of here with the same sense of peace that no matter what your family circumstances are, no matter what your family dynamics are as a single mom or stepdad, that this isn't the goal, and it's certainly not something to feel guilty over the fact that you can't hand this to your son or daughter, because I don't think this is a good goal. I don't even think this is necessarily a biblical or Christian goal. When you just look at families in America, the statistics that come out anytime they do a census, the stats on family, only 1 in 4 families, around 25% of families, are a nuclear family of a mom, a dad living with their biological children, which means sort of that image that gets lifted up of, kind of the Claire and Phil Dunphy family from apparently not a modern family crowd. Sorry, Kim and Kanye. This is more of a Kim and Kanye crowd. The image of sort of that nuclear family, that's just not a realistic picture in terms of America, of what family is. That means on the other side of the coin, 75% of families in America are of a single mom doing the best she can to raise her kids. In fact, when I talk to families at our church, these are the stories. It's stepdads, it's stepkids. It's just not the picture that often gets lifted up of what family, is sort of portrayed in advertisements or in culture. And I think if we're really honest, sometimes church makes this worse, doesn't it? Because there's that picture of what a Christian dad is supposed to be. There's that picture of what a Christian husband or a Christian mom is supposed to be. And I remember when I was a kid, my mom, a single mom, we would go to church and we would pull in the parking lot, and there would be this, sort of thing that would settle in with mom and I of we just didn't want to go to that particular church or go to a church, because we would look through the windshield as we would pull into the parking lot of a church, and often this is what we would see. And there was this sense, and some of us know exactly what I'm talking about, I just don't think we belong here, because when you tell your story of family and you look at all the other stories, or seemingly the stories of family, you just don't feel congruent with what the picture of family is supposed to be. And so I think this is really important today, that we all just sort of free ourselves from the illusion that this is the goal, because this isn't even necessarily biblical. In fact, if you just want to feel better about yourself today, just go home and read stories of families in the Bible. You will feel a lot better about yourself today. There's Adam and Eve, and they, kind of get off to a good start, and then everything kind of falls apart. Most of us know that story. But then they have, this is the first family in the Bible. They have 2 kids, and one of the kids kills the other kid. Not exactly a picture-perfect Pinterest family. There's Noah, and we love the stories of Noah putting all the, the animals on the ark. I think most of us, you've at least heard that story before. But we never tell the story of after that. We never tell this, this is never in the children's Bible, when Noah gets drunk and takes all his clothes off, and his kids have to cover him up because they're embarrassed for him. Not exactly a Pinterest moment for Noah in fatherhood. And this is just over and over again. There's King David, the great king of Israel. His house, you just read the story of his house. Stories you wouldn't even tell in church. They're just unbelievable and dramatic. And King David, most of us, maybe if you grew up in church, you've heard the story where he has an affair with Bathsheba, and then he has Bathsheba's husband killed. Not exactly a Pinterest perfect, picture perfect kind of father. And then you think, well, we get to the New Testament. Surely Jesus' parents were a lot better. Mary and Joseph, maybe they're kind of the iconic picture of what parents should be. But you remember the story where they left Jesus in the temple for 3 days and didn't even know where he was? DFACS would have gotten called on Mary and Joseph. Not exactly a Pinterest perfect, picture perfect moment. Sort of my whole goal for today is simply this. I just don't believe God is in the business of creating perfect pictures. In fact, when I read the Bible, I think this is just the theme throughout the Bible over and over again. And I think this is true for Father's Day, Mother's Day. I think this is true for our families. God's not in the business of creating perfect pictures. God is in the business of using broken people to tell beautiful stories. And no matter what your family dynamics are, no matter what your family story is that you would tell, I believe if there's breath in your lungs, God isn't in the business of trying to create a picture of perfection. He's in the business of wanting to tell stories of redemption. He's in the business of wanting to use broken people, which I think we all qualify today. He wants to use broken people, broken dads, broken moms, broken stepfathers, broken single moms. He wants to use broken people like you and me to tell beautiful stories through. I mean, that's just the business that God's in. He tells beautiful stories through broken people, not creating perfect pictures. If you have a Bible, I want you to turn to Nehemiah chapter 4 is where we're going to be. If you don't have a Bible, you can follow along on the screens, or you can download the CRB app. That's a great place to follow along as well. Nehemiah chapter 4. And I just want to look at Nehemiah. He's this great leader in the history of Israel. This story takes place around 2,700 years ago. These are real people, real places, and real times. And Nehemiah makes a very interesting decision that I, as a military leader, I'm not sure is a good military decision. But he understands something that I think is so powerful for families in the middle of this. And Nehemiah chapter 4 is the story. Just to set a little bit of the context, it's about 2,700 years ago. And in this particular moment, Israel has been laid to ruins. It's been laid to waste. The people have been dragged off. They're in captivity. And in the city of Jerusalem, 2,700 years ago, this is true to this day, there's two things that are of utmost importance. One is the temple, and the other is the wall. The temple is for worship, and the wall is for safety. And these two things in the ancient city of Jerusalem in particular are of utmost importance. One for religious purposes, the other for military purposes. Well, God is going to raise up Nehemiah as a military leader, as a construction worker, as a builder, to return to the city of Jerusalem. And he has this vision and he has this passion to rebuild the wall that surrounds the city of Jerusalem. And Nehemiah understands what's at stake with this. That if you don't have a wall, you don't have a city. And if you don't have a city, you don't have a temple. And the faith of the generations hangs in the balance. And somebody needs to do something. And so Nehemiah says, send me. I want to rebuild the wall. Well, in the middle of reconstructing the wall, there's a military general from another town or another country, Samaria, a guy named Sanballat, which is just a great name. Sanballat hears and catches word that Nehemiah is rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem, and it angers him. And so in the middle of the construction project of rebuilding the wall, Sanballat is going to direct his army and his troops to advance on Jerusalem, and in the middle of the project of rebuilding the wall, to knock it down once again. And Nehemiah hears what Sanballat's plotting, and he makes, in the middle of this, a very interesting, and I'm not so sure a good military decision, but he understands that there's something larger at play in the middle of this. Nehemiah chapter 4, starting in verse 13. This is Nehemiah speaking when he hears that Sanballat is advancing. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall. So there's vulnerable places in the wall, and Nehemiah decides to put people there at the exposed places. And notice what Nehemiah chapter 4 says, posting them by what? Families in the vulnerable places, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles, this would be the men, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. the Sanballat's army, don't be afraid of them. Instead, remember the Lord who is great and awesome, and fight for your families. I love this. It's a William Wallace speech that he gives. Your sons and daughters, your wives, and your homes. He says, sons and daughters of Scotland, remember the Lord. A few of you caught that. It's great. That means 80% of you are asleep. Great. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families, your sons and your daughters, your wives, and your homes. And he places the families in the vulnerable places around the wall to defend the city of Jerusalem. I'm not even sure that's a good military decision. I'm not so sure that's who I would have placed in those particular spots around the wall. And Nehemiah in this moment, he knows, it's not picture perfect. In fact, if you were to take a still shot of this moment in the timeline of Israel, this is a painful moment. This is a messy, brutal, it's going to get bloody. It's going to be, just a dramatic afternoon when Sanballat and his forces advance. But Nehemiah in this moment, he understands that there's something that hangs in the balance and there's something that's worth fighting for. And so he positions, he stations. And in this particular moment, he's not so concerned with Israel reconstructing or rebuilding a wall. He's not so concerned with trying to give them safety. His concern in this moment is that he's trying to give them a story, not a wall to build, but a story to tell. A story that fathers and sons are going to have, and they're going to tell for generations, of the moment when sons saw fathers fighting for them, a moment when sons saw fathers fighting for what matters most, a moment where fathers see sons fighting for them, a moment when families are gathered in the foxhole of life, a moment when families are hunched down and they're fighting for one another. Because, in this moment, Nehemiah knows they're going to fight with a different kind of passion. Not because they're fighting for government, not because they're fighting even for their faith, but because in this particular moment, they're fighting for the thing that matters the most. Their families, they're fighting for their relationships with one another. And he's not so concerned with trying to give them a wall to build. He's concerned in this moment with giving them a story to tell. It's not picture perfect, but there's some beautiful stories that are going to be told through the generations of that bloody afternoon in Israel. When fathers saw their sons fighting, when sons saw their fathers fighting for the thing that mattered the most. And Nehemiah knows that this story is going to be told through the generations of this particular afternoon, this particular moment, when fathers and sons were hunkered down, when everything was messed up. Nobody was going to hang it up and walk away. They were going to hang in there, not fighting for government, but fighting for one another. This story would be told through the generations. I think if you took a snapshot of this moment, maybe I'm crazy, but I just think this is the perfect image of what family is supposed to be. It's messy. It's not picture perfect. It's not sort of the iconic image that we hold up. It's not a perfect picture. But it is a beautiful story of when everything got messed up in Israel, when everything fell apart, when there were broken pieces, when literally lives were going to be lost in this particular moment. It's not a picture of perfection, but it is a beautiful story that will be told through the generations of that afternoon when fathers and sons fought for one another in the vulnerable place. Not a perfect picture, but it's a beautiful story. I think that's the image of what family is supposed to be. Because, at the end of the day, I just think this is true when you read the Bible. God's not in the business of creating perfect pictures. God's in the business of telling beautiful stories. I think about people in our church, when you tell me your story, and oftentimes, and this is why this matters so much, because so many of us in this room, and you've told me your story, you're a stepdad. And you entered into your stepdaughter's life when she was 7 or when she was 17. And you knew when you entered into her life that you couldn't recreate the perfect picture, that somewhere along the way this had been shattered for her. But the stories that are told are of you leaning into the vulnerable place in her life, you leaning into those painful moments, not trying to recreate a perfect picture. But what she's going to tell one day is a beautiful story about how you carved out space, about how you connected, about how you stepped up to the plate. And all of a sudden, there wasn't a perfect picture, but there's a beautiful story that gets told because you stepped in to the vulnerable place and you fought for what matters the most. I think about single moms. I hear this story every single week at CRB. Single moms who regret that somewhere along the way, the perfect picture got shattered. It wasn't supposed to be this way. That's not what you wanted for your kids. Somewhere along the way, something didn't go the way that it was supposed to. And it's not a story of perfection, or it's not a picture of perfection, but what you're telling is now a story of redemption. And the most amazing thing is your kids, I mean, they're not going to have they're not going to have a picture of perfection, but they're going to have a story of redemption that is so beautiful, a better story of when you as a single mom sacrificed, you leaned in to do, something somewhere along the way that you didn't even know if you could do. And it's not a picture of perfection, it's a story of redemption, and it's beautiful. It's the best thing you can hand the next generation. I just think at the end of the day, God's not in the business of creating perfect pictures. God's in the business of telling beautiful stories through broken people like you and broken people like me. When you think about the Bible, I mean, isn't that the Bible? I mean, you just think about the way the Bible works. There's a perfect picture that gets lost. And God, through that, begins to write a beautiful story. The whole Bible is a beautiful story of after perfection is gone. And I just think this is true. I just think it's a good principle for life. That when perfection ends, when a perfect picture ends or a perfect picture gets shattered, that's often where a beautiful story can begin. I mean, you just read the Bible, Eden gets lost. And Genesis 4 is not God redesigning and recreating Eden and recreating a perfect picture. No, he doesn't recreate a picture of perfection. The Bible is a story of God beginning to tell a story of redemption, of a God who leans in to the vulnerable place, a God who begins to fight for relationship with people like you and me. A story of redemption always trumps a picture of perfection. And the entire Bible is chock full of stories of God using broken people like you and me to tell beautiful stories after perfection has been lost. I talk to guys here a lot, dads at CRB, who, a guy a couple weeks ago comes up after one of our services and says, I have been the worst father in the world. And I asked him how old his kids were. His kids are about my kids' age, just little kids, 5, 3 years old, which I'm just thinking, wait a second, there's not enough time to even know if you're the worst father in the world. I mean, it's just, we as dads can be so hard on ourselves because we hold this up as what we're supposed to be. And if you walk through life and today, you would just say as a dad, I am not a picture perfect father. At the end of the day, what your kids need is not a picture perfect father. What they need is you. And you're not picture perfect, you're a broken person. And the good news is God uses broken people to tell beautiful stories through. And even if you would say about yourself, I'm the worst father in the world, you're still the best candidate for God to tell a story of grace and redemption through, that your sons and daughters will see and will witness. It's not about being a picture perfect father. It's about opening yourself up in the broken places, in the vulnerable places, opening yourself up to acknowledging your own brokenness and hurt in life and realizing God uses broken people to tell beautiful stories through. I think there's something in me, I think there's something in all of us that thinks as parents especially, that if we could just be the right kind of parent, if we could just be the right kind of dad, if we could just be the right kind of wife and the right kind of husband, if we could just be the right kind of parent, then God will use us in the way that he's supposed to in our kids' life. And it's something about our behavior is what influences that. And if your goal and if my goal is to become the picture perfect father, there's just not enough time. You will run out of time in your life, and your kids will graduate and move out, and you will die in the process before you could ever accomplish that goal of becoming that kind of father. It's not about being the right kind of father. It's about realizing in your own life that when you can't be picture perfect, you're going to give your sons and daughters a front row seat to God's grace and God's goodness in your life. And the only thing you need to do with that, or the only thing you need to do to accomplish that is not, be a certain kind of person. It's just cooperate in the moment with whatever God's doing in your heart. If it's to say, I'm sorry, it's to say you're sorry. If it's to ask for forgiveness, it's to ask for forgiveness. And you will begin to tell stories of how 7,000 broken days could be redeemed with one phone call, with one I'm sorry. When you begin to cooperate with whatever God's doing in your heart. Because at the end of the day, I think if we all sat around the table and we all just had a conversation about the things that matter the most, if your son or daughter's faith in God is what's of utmost importance to you or of utmost importance to me, at the end of the day, you don't want your kids telling stories about how picture perfect you are. You want your kids telling stories about how great and good God is. And if what matters the most is their faith in God, I mean, what you want them to talk about is not how perfect the vacation was or how perfect everything at home was. What you ultimately want them talking about is how great and how big God is and when things couldn't be perfect, because that's just how life goes. You were there and you allowed them to witness God taking the broken pieces of a broken person's life, rewriting a story. When there wasn't a picture of perfection, God began to tell a story of redemption. I think for dads especially, this is a tough thing, because I know for me with our 3 boys, I want to give my kids a better life than the life that I had, a better life than the life you see somewhere else. But at the end of the day, if what matters most is my son's faith in God or your kid's faith in God, it's not about giving them a better life. It's about giving them a better story to live inside of. A story of a great big God, not a story of perfect parents, where they can witness God's grace and God's goodness in your heart and in mine. And it doesn't matter where you are on the parenting journey. All you and I need to accomplish that is just to begin to cooperate in this moment with whatever God is doing in your heart, and allowing the God of history to begin to write a beautiful story through you and through me as broken people. This past week, sitting around in our staff meeting, I wish you could have been at the table in our staff meeting this past week. We meet every Tuesday, and we were having a programming meeting, which we have about half our staff is at our programming meeting. And I just asked the question, and I knew this sort of at a surface level. When it comes to families on our staff, just people that work at the church, what are some of the stories of family? And I wasn't surprised by this because I kind of knew this already, but when we began telling stories of family, and this is just on staff, I mean, these are just people that work, these are professional Christians, okay? I mean, these are the people that work at the church. There was no story of a perfect family. Nobody on our staff comes from a perfect family. And as we begin to tell, further details, nobody on our staff has a perfect family. I mean, there's stories of divorce and second marriage. I mean, there's just all kinds of stories of family on our staff. And so we were just talking through this, and I started, just kind of thinking through my own story. When I was in 8th grade, and Father's Day in our house is an interesting day. Rosanna, my wife, she lost her dad to cancer when she was a teenager. And if you could sit down with Rosanna and ask her story, and as painful as that was, when the picture of perfection was shattered, what she would tell you over the last 15 years is a story not of perfection, but a story of redemption. In my own life, when I was in 8th grade, my dad was a Southern Baptist pastor. Some of you that grew up Southern Baptist, or you even know what that is, I mean, you sort of get this, I mean, the angst that's in this story. Dad was a Southern Baptist pastor, wore Southern Baptist suits. This is the 80s, had Southern Baptist hair. Just a well-coiffed man. And when I was in 8th grade, Dad's affair became public. Small town, middle of nowhere, Georgia. And after this becomes public, Dad left the church, left our family. And through the broken pieces of a perfect picture, I just became confident of this. And I think Dad, somewhere along the way, became confident of this. That if we just hung in there and stood in the vulnerable moments and we fought for what mattered the most, we might lose time together because he wasn't living under the roof, but we didn't have to lose each other. We didn't have to lose relationship. We didn't have to lose connection. And it's not a perfect story. There's not a bow on that story. I wish I could, bring Dad out and tell some story of how God did this. I mean, it's not one of those stories. But it's not a story of returning to perfection. But it is a story about how through the broken pieces and the broken, shattered images of life, you can begin to tell stories of redemption. When you hang in there in the vulnerable moments of life. Think about Sal on our staff. He began to tell his story in staff meeting this last week. About how when he was 13, 1979, his parents came in, blindsided him with the news that the perfect picture family was over. They were getting a divorce. He wasn't supposed to talk about it to any of the neighbors. And Sal began to tell the story about how for the last 30 years, It's not a story of perfection, but a story of redemption, about how he has fought for those relationships. He's fought for that connection with his mom and dad. Sal told a story about how last year in his own family, here he is, has his own, new family with his beautiful wife, beautiful daughter, and how, and this, his moms and dads, in his relationship with his teenage daughter, there was a break in the relationship. There was a painful break in the relationship. And Sal began to tell the story. What do you do in that particular moment? Do you build a wall or do you build a bridge? And Sal began to tell the story to our staff about how he just made this decision as a father that although it wasn't going to return to perfection, it could be a story of redemption. Not recreating a perfect picture, but what he's going to fight for and what he's going to hang in there. It's not one of these stories that has a bow on it. It's a story that's still going on. But his goal through all this is not to be right. His goal is to have a relationship with his daughter. His goal is that one day he could stand up and tell a story of redemption. I just think if we all went to lunch today, we all started talking about our families, none of us in the room would tell stories of perfection. And what we should strive to hand the next generation of kids is not pictures of perfection, it's stories of redemption. And if there's breath in your lungs today, doesn't matter where you are on the parenting journey, there is still an opportunity to get this right, to tell a story of God's goodness and God's grace in your life to the next generation. That's a beautiful goal as moms and dads. Let's pray together. God, I pray for dads within the sound of my voice. They hate coming to church on Father's Day. They would rather be golfing right now. But God, through them being here today, there's something that's going to turn. There's a shift in the rudder of life. There is a new direction they can begin to take in a relationship. And if you sat down with that dad and you said, what matters the most? The first thing he would say, no matter how strained a relationship is, the thing that matters the most is his relationship with a daughter or a son. And God, there might be some pain there because it's not a picture of perfection. But God, what's more beautiful than that is that you use broken people to tell beautiful stories through and through him. You can tell a story of redemption today. 7,000 broken days can be redeemed with one phone call, with one email, with one I'm sorry, with one let's get together and talk. And God, I just pray all across our church, there's not pictures of perfection, but there are stories of redemption. Thank you, God, for single moms. I thank you for stepdads. I thank you for broken places that become fertile ground for beautiful stories. Would we be the kind of people that notice, articulate, and play a role in the beautiful stories that you're telling King Jesus? It's in your son's name we pray.